Hi, I'm Kim Brasser, your host for One Voice Evolving podcast. And today our guest is Tara Hettrick, who is a somatic healing coach. Rooted in the wisdom of the body and intuition, her approach honors each unique journey. In the last few weeks, the focus of our conversation has shifted from racial equity, specifically in the United States, to women's voices coming to the forefront in the Answer the Call 2024. So it looks to me like for the next 90 days, we're going to be a little political, more so than we have been. Not to tell you who to vote for or how to think or how to approach it, but to promote safe places where we can take our intersectionality, the things that we are alike and not just different, and have civil discourse. When things happen that trigger us in our world, civil discourse is hard to come by, especially if you have childhood trauma, generational trauma, collective trauma. And that's what Tara and I talk about today. With Tara, clients delve deep, release limitations, and empower themselves to shine brightly. Her unique contribution is all about helping people reconnect with that inner sense of safety and belonging so that they can feel safe in the world. That self-trust was a theme that has come through the last couple of podcasts, and this podcast builds on that for women particularly. Tara gets to mirror our power, our wisdom, and our freedom back to us so that we can step into being who we feel called to be. Witnessing that and liberating us from past traumas is incredibly fulfilling for her, and that's what drives her. At the end, she gives us 3 exercises to do, 3 actual tips for how to get centered when you are triggered before you open your mouth. It's a wonderful conversation, and I hope you'll join us. As always, like, share, comment, subscribe, and we'll see you soon. So I am Kim Brasser, your host for One Voice Evolving podcast, and with us today is Tara Hettrick, who is a somatic healing coach. And I had the privilege of doing some work with her in the last week. And if you've been watching the podcast, you've seen that I got introduced to somatic healing about a month ago, and it was such a unique experience. But Tara told me and got my attention when she said, what if in 90 seconds or 90 minutes?
90 seconds.
All right, let's start there. How do you fix this in 90 seconds, Tara?
Yes. One of the things that we have not been taught is that you can actually process emotions within 90 seconds within your body. And if you're not taught how to do that, what happens is we store it in our body. And over time, it accumulates until it's like our body says, "Oh, alarm." We need to give stronger signals. How does that often show up? Illness, autoimmune disorders, suppression of voice, suppression of who we are as a person, lack of trust, dissociation, all of these things that we're seeing that are so prevalent in today's community. It's like, I fully believe that it's because we have never been taught how to process emotions. So
I know that when I took a leap of faith a few years ago and changed my life completely, I learned to listen to that small, still voice within 90 seconds. If I got inspiration to do something, I had 90 seconds to take action, because if I didn't, that thought would just pass on through and somebody else would pick it up. So is it the same body knowing that gives you 90 seconds to heal as it does to give you 90 seconds to move?
I would venture to say yes, because it's our bodies are so intuitive. We put so much attention lately on the mind, and it's like, how can we rewrite our neurological pathways? Which I venture to say, it's like, yes, they're neurological pathways, but they're in the body, right? So we need, we are mind, body, spirit. It's like you cannot separate the 3 of them. So if you tune into your body and your body's like, okay, I'm feeling this emotion. you're not attaching to the story. And I think this is important because if you attach yourself to the story of it, what does that do? You identify with it. And as soon as you identify with it, it's part of you. It's how you operate in the world.
Mhm.
Versus it's like the 90 seconds. I feel this emotion in my body. I know where it is in my body. I can feel it. So it's like you're bringing your presence down into it. You breathe into it. You breathe love. You breathe peace. And you say, I see you. So you're rebuilding the trust that's been broken throughout generations. So you're rebuilding that trust within yourself to say, okay, I see this emotion. I'm breathing through it. I feel it. And then it dissipates. It dissipates. Versus we can hold on to that emotion for years, generations, and pass it on to the next person. So yes.
So now that what we just did is a perfect second segment. So now I'm going to go back to the beginning of, you know, so Tara, tell us about how you arrived at this work, what it has done for you, and what your experience has been with it that makes you want to give this to the world.
Yeah. Yeah. So my background's actually in art therapy. So it's not too far off. And I've always felt this deep calling, this deep desire to help specifically women. That's a call of mine. And throughout art therapy, I kept getting burnt out. So it's like helping, but yet I was burning out. And then I was like, you know what? I'm going to travel the world. So I traveled the world, but what I was doing is I was actually running away from all of the traumas, all of the issues, all of my like habits that I had built up, that coping mechanisms from trauma that I had built up until I got so sick. I was bedridden. And it was a stark contrast of being able to be free. I say free because was I truly free? No. So I went from traveling the world thinking I was free to being bedridden and being forced to look at everything within. So I was given, I say it's one of the greatest gifts I was given because if I hadn't had that moment, that opportunity to sink deep within, that's where inner work happens. It's when we slow down, when we stop the rush, that we're actually able to see it. And so through that, it led me to somatic work because I was like, my body is sick. My body is not responding well. I should be thriving at this age, and yet I'm not. So why? I got curious. I found somatic work, and I was like, this is it. This this is what my body has been missing. So I started like peeling back the onion of habits, bringing stuff up out of the unconscious because we operate out of patterns. We operate out of programs. 90, I think it's 95% of our day is unconscious. So if we're thinking about that, it's like what programs have been programmed into us? What have we experienced that we're now operating out of that program? So it's necessary to go in and just get curious, look at the programs, be like, is this serving me anymore? No. It, and I think this is something that I love to stress because oftentimes we feel so much shame and guilt about the way we operate in the world, the way we do things, when in fact, at some point in our history, whether it's our own or it's generational, um, it helped us survive something. It's a coping mechanism that helped us survive. And so we can say, thank you for that gift. It no longer serves me. I get to choose another way. And so it was through this process of just like, it wasn't like ripping off the covers, but it was going deep. And there was so much within that it took a while, I would say. And then all of a sudden, I started to see that there was hope. And I started to see that, oh, I can actually choose a different way. Oh, I can be free. I can feel peace. I can like move slowly. I can just experience nature. I can breathe in peace and feel it, actually feel it. And I rebuilt the trust that I had broken with myself, which we do. Like we do through rushing, through dissociation, through traumas. It's like it breaks that connection with us. I rebuilt it to a point where it's like, if this happens for me, it can happen for any person. And then I was like, I want every single person to be able to experience this freedom, to experience this joy of life, to experience that they can pursue their purpose without that fear, without feeling restricted. And so, yeah, that's how I moved into somatic work and helping others.
Thank you. So self-trust. And I've done a lot of therapeutic work in my lifetime of going back to those childhood wounds or inner child work or whatever. But you and I touched on generational trauma, and you had some interesting statistics that I would love for you to share with our audience about.
Yes. Yes. So, generational trauma, it's very fascinating scientifically. So, I like to preface this because a lot of people are like, "Oh no, like like we're our own person." I'm like, "Well, science says you actually carry 7 generations worth of everything. Trauma, operation." So, oftentimes like you'll hear like, "Oh, you have the courage of your grandfather. You have your grandmother's eyes. You have like the perseverance of your great grandmother." So it's things like that. We focus on the good. But if we're focusing on, like, think about that. If you are able to carry the good, you're also able to carry the bad.
Mhm.
And if you deny yourself looking at those traumas, what they went through, how they had to cope and operate, it's an unconscious program that then gets passed on through generations, up to 7 generations. So they are saying the last study that I saw, they're like, we're actually testing up to 14 generations.
I
So,
was I was just thinking that because I thought, well, if that's true for us, then that was true for my seventh generation back, and they were carrying 7 generations before them. And how, I mean, how do you know when people say, like in racial equity, you weren't ever a slave and I never owned slaves, so it's not my problem. But if I go back 7 generations, or if I dared to go back, another century, then am I still carrying the collective trauma, not even just in my family, but the collective trauma? How does collective trauma compare to generational trauma?
yes. So generational trauma is how your family lineage responded to a specific trauma. And so, like, you can see that. And maybe your family, if something traumatic happens, it's like immediately they go to the negative. If that's the case, that's actually a family, like a passed down trait. It doesn't have to be that way, but that's just the unconscious programming that we've been taught, and that's okay. We can change it. Collective trauma, that happens more on, it doesn't have to be wide, it doesn't have to be worldwide, but it has to be wide scale. So, for example, war, genocide, um, the pandemic, that was worldwide. That right there in itself. And also, one that I really love to focus on, and I know this can be a trigger for a lot of women. And I say, if it is a trigger for a lot of women, then I just encourage them to like step back and get curious because it's triggering them for a reason. And that is the witch wound. And so the witch wound, how that shows up in the collective trauma, it's shown no preference. So it's like no partiality to race, religion, location, nothing. It's like this was a worldwide scale trauma that happened particularly to women. Some men, yes, but particularly to women. And so prior to that, it said, what did women do? They gathered in community. They had support of each other. They had natural gifts of healing with like herbs and remedies. They spoke their voice. A lot of times they were leaders in certain tribes. And what the witch trials did is it broke up communities, it broke up communication. So women learned to suppress their voice, they learned to hide who they were, hide their natural abilities in the world. And yes, voice suppression of like who you are. And there's one more. Pausing. So we learn to suppress all of these natural given abilities that we have as women. And due to that, we feared for our lives. We feared to show the uniqueness of who we are. And that shows up today. It shows up in insecurity. It shows up in shame and guilt. Even, this is fascinating. It's even women who are like very successful, who are seen as like top of the echelon. You ask them, it's like, I have insecurities. I have fear. I have guilt. I have shame.
Imposter syndrome.
Imposter syndrome. Exactly. Exactly. And you can trace it back to those moments because, again, women were taught like, oh, it's not safe to talk to other women. It's not safe to have these conversations anymore. I have to do it on my own. So we see it in hyper independence, hyper awareness too, suppression of self.
So when trust is broken between women, and if you were raised in our country, certainly that's kind of the culture.
Yeah.
How does somatic healing help you learn to be in community with other women safely?
Yeah. I
Healing.
think, right, feeling safe. And it actually starts with yourself. And I know that's counterintuitive because you're like, oh, like the natural balance would be community. But you first have to be aware of it within yourself and say, where am I breaking the trust with myself on a daily basis? And we do it so often because collective trauma, complex PTSD, so complex post traumatic stress disorder, which many people, many women suffer from without knowing, I would say. And what that does is we learn to almost lie to ourselves. And how often, I mean, I'm guilty of this too in the past. Now it's like I make it a point. If somebody asks me, how are you doing today? And I'm really not doing well, but how often do we say, oh, I'm fine. Like, I got this. I'm good. Like, what you're telling your body is like, oh, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what's happening on the inside. It doesn't matter that I'm feeling sad today. It doesn't matter that I'm actually feeling sick, when in fact it does. And so it's simply, you don't have to tell everybody your story or your woes, specifically if it's not safe. But if a trusted person comes up to you and says, how are you? You can be like, I'm actually not so great today. I'm feeling sad. And that's okay. It's okay. But that right there, that's saying, oh, I honor who I am. I honor my truth. You're starting to rebuild that trust. And so it's listening to your somatic somatic signals is the word I would use. And we've been taught push through, hustle, ignore, ignore what's happening on the inside, when that's actually one of your greatest strengths. Women are intuitive beings. hormonally, I mean, we are cyclical beings too, but it's like hormonally, it's very intuitive. And so think about that. If you're denying who you are, you're breaking up the communication. You're breaking up that trust. So as soon as you say, like, what is going on in my body today? What does my body need to feel safe? What does it need to feel devotion, to feel good and happy? And you give yourself that, plain and simple. So for example, I'll give an example. Like it's very simple. A few days ago, I was feeling tired. And I could have continued working. I could have pushed through, and I would have in the past. That would have been my MO, is like, oh, gotta keep going, gotta be successful, gotta like show that I'm working, show my worth. Versus, I know I'm already worthy. I'm worthy of who I am as a person, just by being. I honor that. I was like, what does my body need at this moment? It needs a nap. And I gave myself a nap, and I woke up and I was like, like I feel so good. Like I feel free. I feel joyful. And I would not have had that experience if I had pushed through. So that's rebuilding the trust. That's somatic work on a very like smaller scale.
So when we talked about collective trauma and you mentioned the pandemic, and I know that if trauma happens, it triggers any unfinished business I have anyway. But the pandemic truly was collective trauma. And we truly did have to lay low, play small, be still, be quiet, don't make waves, whatever it was. How much of our, and I work with people all the time who are still not recovered from that, including myself. We shared, I just got a COVID diagnosis yesterday, and my head is running on overtime with all of the next steps to do it right, instead of slowing down and listening to what my body needs. So in this collective trauma, is it possible, does it work that way, that another global trauma, climate change, triggers something from some past generation, that it remains unfinished? And is that, when that happens, how do you pick out what's present from what's past and get to a root cause on that?
Oh, it's such a great question, Kim. And I would say it's not past, because if it's coming up now, that means it's yours, and it's yours to deal with, and it's yours to change for future generations. Yes. And so, for example, the pandemic, yes, that siloed people. I mean, I'm also seeing people come and they haven't recovered, and that's okay. And it's like, what are the wounds? What are the triggers coming up? Because if you look though, some people thrived and some people didn't. So what was the difference? And you can go back and it's like, oh, my family did this in the past, which now allowed me to heal and to be fully in my, like, in who I am as a person, that allowed me to thrive in this moment and not lose hope. And not, I think the communication part was a really big one for people, and separation. And that brought up a lot of trauma. So it's like, again, it's not just the witch wound, it's like all of those wounds that are coming up. I'll give an example of my personal family lineage. My great grandmother, she was a immigrant from Czechoslovakia. She came over when she was young. Her parents brought her over. They had to go back to Czechoslovakia to like finish up some stuff. They had every intention of coming back to her, so they dropped her off with an aunt. When they were there, the Iron Wall went up, communism, and they were not able to leave. She never saw her parents again. And so that wound, I can see how it has transpired throughout my grandfather and my mother. And so it's like I can see how that plays out in their desire to have family always close. And sometimes that's not realistic. Sometimes like we have to move away. And it's like, but is that a fear that I choose to carry? It's not a fear. It's instead, it's like I have gone in deep. It's like that fear, I release it. I know it like I can see how like my family still operates out of it, and that's okay. It's like I'm choosing love. I'm choosing to hold my space, and I'm choosing to say like this is how I want to be. Like I want to pursue healthy communication, healthy connection, and due to that healing, I was able to maintain beautiful connections throughout the pandemic. But that was, but again, so it's like I had to heal that wound first in order to have that beautiful result, to not feel isolated. But if we weren't taught that, if we didn't have the tools, it's like, yeah, you will feel isolated. You will feel that pain.
Well, and so much of the tools that come down through our DNA, through our genes, depend on what that seventh generation back told themselves about that story. Because the story you tell yourself, what you believe, is how you feel, is what you act on. And so by going back those 7 generations or doing somatic work, my guess is that you have an opportunity to look at not just your story.
Yes, it's true.
Touches me every time. But
Yeah.
I've worked with women for a long time in codependent recovery, and I've said to them, we will do things for our daughters we would never do for ourselves. Fast forward to this movement, the call to action 2024 around politics, and I've never been political or had this political discussion, but I just feel like this collective trauma and the suppression
Yes.
from decades or centuries is rising in a way I've never seen it rise. And the fear and the pushback is bigger than I've probably ever seen it be, which doesn't mean it wasn't the same, during the witch period. But how, you know, how do you preserve relationship with the other sex, for example, when you're triggered on multiple levels? And how
Yeah.
does somatic healing help you navigate that? If you deal with the feeling today, that is today, it drops the last 7 generations, heals, boom, 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 or do you have to go back like past life regression and go reveal and figure all that out?
No, I would venture to say if you're feeling it now, it's yours. And so that means you get to deal with it. Which deal with it, I mean, it's like what a gift. Like truly it's a gift because um for somatic work and like dealing with the opposite sex and everything that's happened, it's like yes, we're triggered, but it's like the trigger is yours. Like, let's get down to it. It's like the trigger is yours because two people could be in the same exact situation and one person could not be triggered and one person could be triggered.
Yeah.
Everything. So it starts with this like radical responsibility of everything that I'm feeling is mine. Everything. So it's like and that's beautiful because it's like, oh, if everything that I'm feeling is mine, that means I get to do something with it. I'm not being controlled by the past. I'm not being controlled by the outside forces. But oftentimes we give our power away to those outside forces. So it's learning to just start looking. It's like, how am I operating in the world? Am I operating out of survival? And I would venture to say 90% of us, and I know that's high, but it's like with all of my clients I've worked with, it's been 100%. So that's why I'm saying 90 because a little a little bit of leeway. Um,
Correction.
90% operate out of pure survival. And that's fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. So that's your sympathetic nervous system. You are on alert. Um, you like if stress comes, you hold it in your body, and it's like you get through, you rush. And I can always tell when if I'm walking with a friend, I can always tell if they're in survival or not.
Mhm.
Because women, yeah,
I know where you're going.
women hold 60 to 80% of their stress, trauma, tension in their hips.
Mhm.
Okay. And if you are in survival, you walk. Like you're not even just like you're not looking around. You're not you're not swaying your hips. You're not just like in the moment. You're going. Like, and so I can tell if they're in survival. And this is the beautiful thing about community. This is how that helps heal that component is if I can see them being in survival, I intentionally slow down. I intentionally ask them a question and it forces them to look back at me because I'm behind them because they're going like they don't see. It's blinders. That's what trauma does. Trauma, it doesn't just interrupt communication. Trauma, stress, what it does is it puts on blinders and says this is the only way. This is the only way through. And so if I ask them a question, it forces them to turn around, slow down, and get out of themselves, get out of their minds and focus on something else. And it immediately their bodies can relax. And it says like, oh, this is a safe space. Yeah.
Take a pause here. I just had a vision of what it would be like to get you and Gina and somebody else I just thought of on a three-way call about this, about our bodies and all of that. I don't know, that's interesting. You nailed it. I am known for my police walk. And and I learned it when I was 21 and I worked for the police department in Las Vegas. And I had
Mm,
to walk 2 city blocks through downtown Las Vegas to get to the courthouse. And construction workers and, all manner of whatever. And in order for me to be safe in that walk, I had to, in my mini skirt, I had to be purposeful and intentional and have a kick ass and take names persona. And I didn't lay that aside until I retired.
mm,
Now I
yeah.
don't walk outside and I live in the woods.
Yeah.
Oh, you and I have some work to do. But thank you for sharing that. That was very helpful to me personally. And that will be in the podcast too, because that's
Yeah.
important.
It's so
And
important.
yeah.
Yeah. It's this awareness. And I think that's the beautiful thing about somatic work is we are so dissociated. That's one of the things that happened from the witch trials was dissociation. It's like um and we couldn't trust ourselves, but that just we are so dissociated, we're so numbed out because like we're on overload. Our bodies, our minds, our emotional body, it's on overload. It's like it can't handle anymore. So that somatic work, why it's so powerful, specifically for women who have experienced sexual abuse, is you don't actually have to go into the story to heal. So with traditional talk therapy, it's like you do have to talk about it. And for a lot of women, that recreates the trauma. And so they say, no, I'm not going to seek help. And so they suppress it even more. And then that suppression gets passed on to the next generation. It's not safe to talk about these things. It's not safe to talk about our pain and what we went through. And so you hold it. And so the next generation, like your daughters, will say, oh, if this happens to me, it's not safe to talk about. So that's how generational trauma gets passed on to. Versus somatic work, you can go in and say, I know this is what I felt at this time. So not going into the story, because again, you also mentioned it. It's like, as soon as you say, this is the story, we identify with it and it becomes our own. And then that's a program we then choose to operate out of, whether we like it or not. That's the thing. So the somatic work says, okay, this is the feelings. I get to reclaim that moment in my body. What did my body want to do? Did it want to scream no? Scream no. Did it want to get up and leave the room? You get up and leave the room. So you retrain your body to do the necessary thing, to do the good thing, to do what it was intuitively telling you to do, and you denied it out of fear, out of past traumas. So it's like you're reclaiming who you are as a person, rebuilding that trust. And so the next time something happens, because this is life, things do happen. It's like you then have the power, you then have the voice to say no. You then have the voice to say, I am not choosing this. I get to leave. I have my boundaries. Like, I love you, but you're disrespecting me. And I'm not okay with that. And I don't feel safe. So I'm going to choose to leave. And so you actually physically get up when before you could have been caught in the freeze state. So it's like that reclamation of self in those moments then allows you for future to choose the good. Yeah, it is fascinating. And also, I mean, that goes, that, yes, it's for negative situations. We call them negative, like the trauma. But it's also for positive too. So it's like, when did you suppress experiencing joy? Like, when did you suppress your laughter and like childlike wonder at an experience? You get to go back to those moments too, somatically, and be like, oh, what did my body want to do? It wanted to just like throw their hands up and be like, yes, like this is my life. I'm free. Like I feel a joy. You get to go back to those moments, do that. So then the next time when something beautiful happens, you're free. You're free to express, free to be. Yeah.
Okay, so we're about 45 minutes into this.
Wow.
And every time we do this, I ask our guests to give us 2 or 3 resources for the viewers that they have found helpful or would recommend, whether they're books or movies or processes or whatever. And we put those up on the website along with all of your information. So can you think off the top of your head about 3 meaningful things that would be helpful?
Yes. Okay. These are actually practices. So practices people can start doing today. And I just want to preface this too. These practices, it's like do them every day. Commit to yourself. It's honoring yourself to do these things. If you feel like, if there is some part of you that's like, ooh, this kind of triggered something for me in this podcast today, or ooh, I'm feeling like a little uncomfortable about something, do these practices because you're rebuilding the foundation of trust within yourself. And then that leads you to the next step of healing. And you don't have to do it all at once. I think that's another thing. You don't have to do it all at once. But what these practices do is they kind of build that muscle so that when the time comes for the next step of healing, you're like, I'm ready. I got this. So, number one, a great way to get out of the survival state is breathing. And it's so simple, but for those who have experienced trauma, specifically childhood trauma, but any type of trauma, we chest breathe. If you can remember, it's like, when is the last time I actually breathed from my diaphragm? It's most people, they can't remember. They're like, oh, I don't know. So it's a practice. I call it a 3-step breath. So you breathe, so you can put a hand on your stomach, a hand on your chest, breathe in through your diaphragm. So you like push out your diaphragm, breathe in through your chest. Then do a small third breath. So you're filling your lungs to full capacity. Hold it. Breathe for as long as you can. And do that minimum 3 times. And you'll notice your body is like, oh, we're safe. Because you cannot breathe from your diaphragm if you're not safe, if you're not in your parasympathetic nervous system. So that's step one. So you're retraining your body to say, okay, I'm safe in this moment. I don't have to be in survival. And I would encourage you to do that in the morning. If you can do it like 3 times a day, great. But specifically in the morning when you wake up, because you're setting the tone for the rest of the day. You're telling your body, oh, we're safe for the rest of the day. So that's number one. Number two, I would activate the vagus nerve. And so then again, that takes you right out of survival and into a state of rest, digest, and heal, the state we really want to be in. And you can do that through humming. You can do that through a hot bath. And my favorite way, actually, is you kind of sit, you put your hands on your knees, deep breath in, and you go, close your eyes. In your mind, you say, okay, I'm safe here in this moment. And you go, ooh, until you have no breath left. What that does is it shakes your vagus nerve. Your vagus nerve then responds and says, oh, we're safe. So it's like a simple thing again. So it's like you can do the breath work, you can do this, but do it daily. Do it daily. It's like commit to that. And then this is one of my favorites is shaking or dancing. And it's like, when is the last time you allowed yourself to just let go? To be free, to move. And oftentimes we can't remember. Or it's like, even if you're dancing like out with the girls, it's like you still kind of like you're not free. Like you gotta be like, oh, I gotta keep up appearances. So I say shut your door, lock it if you need to. Make sure you feel safe to do this, because this is an important part, is you feel safe. If you don't have a room, go into your closet. Go into your closet. If you don't want people to hear, put earphones in. But you put on a song that you're really feeling like called to. And it could be fast, it could be slow, whatever it is. And then I just encourage you. So it's again, women hold their stress, tension, trauma in their hips most of the time. So start moving your hips, move it in a figure 8. And it's like start swaying. So it's like just keep that up. And then it's like, okay, can I move my arms? It's like, can I move the rest of my body? And you might feel awkward at first because you've been so tense for so long and stuck in survival. That's okay. You're in a safe space. There's no one there around you. And you can even tell yourself, I'm safe here in this moment. And I'm choosing to let go. Then you do the figure 8, okay? You're doing it, you're moving it. Oftentimes, you might feel intense grief. You might feel tense guilt or shame. And I would say, great, because you're no longer holding it. And so when that happens, if that intense grief happens, it's like, don't get caught up in the story, because again, we identify it when we get caught up in the story. It's like, oh, there's grief here. I choose to feel it. I choose to bring myself down. I choose to meet it and say, I see you. And I love you just the way you are. Thank you. Thank you for showing me this. Breathe into it. Breathe until it dissipates. And then keep dancing. And it's like, challenge yourself to open up. Challenge yourself to open your heart space. We close ourselves because we want to protect. Naturally, our body want to protect. So challenge yourself. And as you're doing that, you just say, I'm safe. And so that's a practice I recommend because it brings joy. It brings childlike joy and playfulness. And one of the parts for rewiring the brain, actually, playfulness rewires the brain 10 times faster than if you were to do it repetitively. So think about that. So that's my tips.
That's wonderful. So if people want to reach out to you, Tara, for further work or to learn more, how would they do that? What's the best way to find you?
They can find me on Instagram at embodied somatic healing, or they can go onto my website, www.embodiedsomatic.com, and just send me a message.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for your time today. Is there any parting thoughts that we didn't touch on that you think are important?
Yes. Every single woman can heal. Every single person can heal. And it's a lie to think that you can't. And so I think that right there is that everybody deserves to feel free, to feel joy, and to feel peace. And you can. It's not out there for just anybody. It's here for you. So yeah.
Thank you so much for your time.
Oh, you're welcome, Kim. It was such a joy.